This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides. So head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more. Welcome to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven, and lots of different guests week by week. And this week, I have an interesting story to tell you, really, which is that I'm joined by Dominic Rose, who's the chairman of our company, and he has set up an organisation that is called Britain's Biggest Living Garden. And it's just such a lovely story that I thought it was a shame that we don't talk about it. So Dominic, hello Dominic, first of all.
Thank you for having me.
Dominic is, as I say, he's the chairman of our company, and he came along to one of our press days where we had Steve Head, who some of you will remember is our kind of biodiversity expert. And Steve runs this thing called the Wildlife Garden Forum. And he was doing a talk because we were having an audit of the garden here, a biodiversity audit. And Dominic was there. And, well, you take up the story from there, really, because it's your story, not mine.
Yeah, so it all stems from that wonderful press day and that sort of fortuitous meeting with Steve Head. And he'd been talking about why and how gardens and residential gardens are such an important biodiversity habitat in the UK, both because of the huge volume of gardens, but also because of the sort of variety of species that they support, and that arguably they're the most important habitat for biodiversity in the UK, which I found fascinating and I never really thought hugely about. And then there was sort of a throwaway comment at the end that I think someone asked a question of Steve of if you were getting involved with a new build development or estate, what would you suggest to make them more friendly for biodiversity? And his one comment was, they always sort of give you a plot of land and a bit of mud and some fences around it. And it's just a shame that they don't connect the gardens together and have some holes between the fences so that different animals and creatures can go between them. And it sort of sparked a bit of a light bulb because I am lucky, I suppose, to live in an unusual part of planned urban living in North London called Hampstead Suburb that was sort of planned and built about 120 years ago, but with an idea of bringing some urban dwellers closer to nature. And as a result, we've got about 5,000 houses here, almost all of which have a garden or outside space. And I think uniquely, an unusual bylaw has been passed that means that we all have to have our gardens bordered by hedges. And so I claim, without any real measurement, that we have the highest density of hedging in the UK. And so it kind of just sparked a moment. I thought, well, we've got loads of gardens. They're all really well connected. Here's a great and unique opportunity to try and do something with that. And I sort of chatted to Steve about it after the talk had finished, and he got excited, and it sort of grew out from there, really.
Yeah. And I suppose it's such a great story. But the first thing I always think that people ask me about in an urban environment is, okay, well, it might be good for nature, but what about foxes? I mean, do you find in Hampstead Garden Suburb there is a massive issue, as there is in most of London anyway, but with foxes?
Yes, we have many fox residents, and you'll see them almost every night, around the gardens, around the streets. I would say generally it feels like people are split between people who love foxes and who actively encourage them and feed them, and then the other 50% who absolutely detest foxes and do everything they can to try and eliminate or get rid of them. But actually what's quite nice is I think there is a sort of reasonable balance between those two, and there's lots of people sharing tips to prevent foxes in your garden if that's not what you want, although one that I have not tried or validated seems to be male urine. which always gets people interested or excited. But there's lots of kind of powders and sprays that you can try if you don't want the foxes coming in. So yeah, it's a real mixture, whether they're seen positively or negatively.
Yeah. But anyway, for flying biodiversity, it's not an issue. So tell me what happened. So you went away, you had this sort of light bulb moment, and then went away and sort of take us through what happened after that.
So I started to come up with ideas of what that would mean and what we could do to put it into practice. And working closely with Steve Head, that sort of came together in almost like a project plan that I wrote up, and I called it Britain's Biggest Living Garden, because it felt like a kind of catchy name, and set it really with this sort of lofty ambition of saying, wouldn't it be amazing if we could make this area where I live, or where I'm lucky to live, into the most biodiverse urban or suburban area in the UK as a kind of joint ambition? And that the way to achieve that would be through effectively community action, acting together to make changes in both private spaces and public spaces. And I found that I feel like lots of people talk about biodiversity, and it's always lots of support. But generally speaking, it seems to be very focused on kind of public land, big tracts of public land. You hear a lot about it on farms, or really big kind of estates or new developments. And you don't hear very much about it happening in sort of local areas where you are. And that was something that my eyes have been open to, that you can make a real change. And I wanted to do it through a way of showing that by acting together, a community can make a meaningful and a measurable difference. And in a way, that has sort of become actually the most important part of it, aside from delivering actual results in terms of better biodiversity. What's become really important is the fact that if we can show that a community can make a difference, that hopefully becomes a case study that can be rolled out and replicated nationally and internationally. Because often, I was thinking about this earlier, communities or people can either resort to complaining, as, or someone else should deal with this, or campaigning, which is trying to get other people to deal with it. But actually what I think has been unique with this project is the ability to take true ownership and just get on and do stuff. So I wrote up a kind of 4-page document with all my ideas in one place and emailed it to just about everyone I could think of locally. We've got quite an active residents association. We've got this slightly mysterious trust who govern the area. We've got the council, the horticultural society. So I just sort of spread this email out, and really the rest has been history. We had a huge amount of positivity. I was lucky to find some really early cheerleaders and champions within those organizations who not only have been motivated by the type of change, which they are, but also because they recognize that it gave the community a sense of local purpose and identity, which I think had probably been lacking. And I think it's probably lacking in communities all around the country and all around the world. And then actually we could sort of stand for something and do something and be proud of the area. And it's sort of grown from there. So I've, built a website around it, britain'sbiggestLivinggarden.org, where I kind of collate lots of information. Steve hosted a great talk. We had about 250 attendees. I've worked closely with lots of different local bodies. And most importantly, I suppose, built a real engaged local community. So we've got a database now of about 250 people who've all completed quite a detailed survey about biodiversity in their garden and their attitudes. I have a WhatsApp group of now 140 people, which, uniquely for a large WhatsApp group is not lots of moaning and negativity, but it's only ever full of positivity. I've set up a kids gardening club. So there's just so many aspects that have all kind of sprung into life. But it's a 10-year mission. It's not a 1-year mission.
So obviously massive community benefit to what you've been doing. And have you now, sort of talking about the nature side, have you done baseline surveys so that you can see the benefit of integrating and sort of the things that are affected most from 1 year to the next?
Yeah, absolutely. So measurement is a really important part of the project. to be able to kind of show that we can make a difference, and also just establish what the levels are. And it's also helpful for people gaining support locally to show what we have and what we don't have. And as a side note, one thing I think is really interesting with biodiversity is lots of things that are good for the environment. You can do something as an individual and you don't really see or know any difference. If you're targeting global warming, you could do all the recycling you want, but you're never going to know if you've made a difference. Whereas biodiversity, you can do a change, but you see it in your garden, you feel it in your local area. So we've taken a sort of multi-prong attack to measurement. We have just completed and commissioned some ecologist-led biodiversity surveys. And we did that in 4 different sites around the area, some domestic gardens, some communal gardens, some kind of semi-woodland area, and a bit of parkland that we've effectively been given by the council to take over. And the results aren't yet in from those. They're being collated at the moment, but I was lucky to accompany Noel, our ecologist, on doing a couple of those surveys. And anecdotally, the baseline was already really high. Hedges seem like a great thing to have in a domestic garden because they support so many species, even if there's nothing else there apart from a basic lawn and grass. And anecdotally, the gardens which had lots of flowers and plants, such as mine, which all comes from Sarah Raven, of course, had much higher levels of biodiversity spotted. So we've had some surveys done, and that hopefully will establish a baseline, and we'll then replicate those every year for the next 10 years and show if there is progress. But we've also engaged a sort of community wildlife recording group of people who are more interested in it, and we've encouraged people to use an app called iNaturalist, which I've sort of become slightly addicted to, as have my children. And that you take a photo, upload it, it will use some AI to tell you roughly what they think it is. And then a kind of whole community of real specialists will tell you exactly what it is. And not only does it log and identify it, it can then be uploaded into a sort of central scientific database that can be used for research. Because if you look, there's a real lack of data around residential areas. So it's really important.
Oh, that sounds fantastic.
And then we also try to encourage people to participate in things like the bird watch and the big butterfly count and various different kind of recording exercises, which has gone really well. And people are really starting to sort of talk about it and enjoy it and get involved in it.
That's so good. And I mean, you just mentioned your children there, but I know, chatting to you not on the podcast, one of the things that has become a massive thread of this, as well as the community and the nature enrichment, is the involvement of children and schools and children's groups and stuff. And so will you chat us through that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it had always been something I was really keen on, and partly through my own experience. I'm a relatively keen, if amateur gardener, and I spend lots of time out in the garden. And my kids, I've got 2 boys who are just turned 8 and 5, and they just love it. They love coming out in the garden with me. They love helping. They love anything they can get involved in doing or growing, and they just think it's fascinating and wonderful and brilliant. And I sort of noticed that their friends would come over, and their friends would all want to get involved and do it. And then the friends' parents would come over and say, "Oh, can you show my kids how to do this?" Or they really hear that you're great at showing them. And I realized that I think a lot of people have become relatively detached from their gardens. Either they're just not interested in it, or if they are interested in it, they have professional gardeners who come and do it for them. And so there's just felt like there's relatively little kind of passing on of either information to the younger generation, but also they weren't being inspired. So gardens were just seen as a place to go and play football or get muddy, rather than a kind of something that's really interesting. And that felt like a massive miss. And the other part is, if part of my objective on the project was to change behaviours locally, reduce use of pesticides, don't put down astroturf, put in more flowers, be sensible about decisions you're making. Driving change is really difficult. And I sort of felt like kids were a good way of doing that. If you can get the children who innately are interested and excited there to go back home to their parents and speak to their friends and go to their school and say, "Oh, can we put a pond in our garden?" Or could we, I don't think we should get astroturf because I know it's not good for the environment. That's how you really inspire change. And so for a long time, I'd wanted to have a kids gardening club because I knew that my kids would love it. And I've always loved doing lots of stuff around kids. And other people had sort of asked me about whether I would do it or set it up. And I was sort of running I suppose, slightly informal one in my own garden. And fortuitously, the new priest, I think, had just started at our sort of local church, who was very focused on the environment and making the church itself more sustainable, and was lucky to have quite a lot of their own land surrounding the church, and was really keen to get more involved in the community and more involved with children and more involved with the environment. And yeah, she sort of said, oh, why don't you just take this patch of our land? It was a disused lawn. I think it had originally been a croquet lawn probably 100 years ago, but really it was only used for storage, and nobody could get into it. It was sort of fenced or hedged off. And, let's just do it. And I think she was surprised at how quickly it happened, because I think within a week I'd set up the first session, and it's really kind of flourished and grown from there. We now meet every week, every Tuesday, and this plain lawn that nobody would ever thought about has become a really thriving community wildlife garden that has been done and led by a group of probably somewhere between 30 and 50 kids overall. They all come with a parent or a carer or a grandparent. We have some volunteers who come occasionally or come regularly. I think our age range of the group now goes from about 6 months old up to I think our oldest volunteer is 87.
Wow, that's so great.
The kids absolutely love it. It's amazing. Like, it's brilliant. They just think they're growing stuff. They're growing fruit and vegetables. We've got a pond. They do all the work. I mean, we help with it and we make sure they're safe, but everyone gets involved with everything. We grow lots of stuff from seed. We've had so much produce. And not only has it been amazing for those kids, and not only has it brought together a whole new community in the area, and like this real sense of intergenerational bonding, like my 5-year-old is obsessed with Hannah, who's the 87-year-old, and will happily hang out with her. So that's been really lovely. But it's together created a real community garden that, now if I go up there, and I'm quite happy to potter around there by myself most of the time and do bits and pieces, but there'll be visitors dropping in continually, and they'll come and sit or have a look, and it's just really, I don't know, it's been a transformationally wonderful experience, I think, for everyone involved.
Oh, so marvellous. And as we go to the end of the growing year, will you carry on, and will the group meet, even if not in the garden, but like maybe in the church or whatever, or in the church hall? Or
yeah, I mean, I think we always sort of find things to keep people active and get them involved with. There's always sort of stuff to do. I mean, what I've learned is some of the work is horticultural work, or moving stuff or digging things. The other part is just 50% of the time the kids just run around after each other and spot bugs, and just them being outside. And it's 2 hours. I remember when I started, it was actually my wife said first of all, she said, 2 hours is much too long for a kid's session. You'll never keep people interested. It should be an hour, 45 minutes, like every other club. And honestly, we have to get people out of the garden after 2 hours. Like, we could be 3 hours there, because they all just run around and have an amazing, amazing time. And we've brought in, we've had wildlife workshops. We've had the ecologist is coming today, and he's going to show the kids what he can find in the pond. And sometimes we'll go little field trips. We went round to a house around the corner. We all helped collect something they donated to us. So there's just sort of stuff to keep people busy. We might start doing some field trips to other sites around the area, and we just kind of feel it out as we go along. And if it's pouring rain, some people will show up, not as many. I think we've only ever had one session when it was the most torrential rain, when it was just me there in the rain. But yeah, we'll see how we go, and we'll kind of and now because it's got such a good reputation locally, and we've really seen the transformation, we're sort of starting to be offered other plots of land. And so, with the Kids Club, like to take this on. We entered some vegetables in our local horticultural society competition and won a certificate, which was delighted. The kids were delighted with. And I think in a way there's been many rewarding aspects, but a group of 6-year-old children fighting over who gets to eat which leafy green we've grown is something I never thought I'd see.
No. Oh, Dominic, it's such a wonderful, wonderful story, isn't it? And so if people want to find out more, they go on your website, Britain's biggest living garden.
It is Britain's, so
It does.
with
Okay.
an S and
Yeah.
S, biggestlivinggarden.org. And that's where I've tried to kind of post loads of just information and what we're doing and various sort of bits and pieces, and you can sign up to various newsletters and share. You know, in terms of the role that gardens can play in supporting wildlife, the Wildlife Gardening Forum's website is truly encyclopedic and is full of great tips. And I suppose the thing that if there was one thing I could hope for people to take away, it's that change starts and happens locally. That's what I've sort of discovered, that making change happen can be sort of scary and overwhelming actually, because you think, oh, I've got to get involved in, how am I going to change government policy or planning policies or all these things. And so, it's sort of almost easy to not do anything because you feel like you have to do everything or nothing. And most people will say, oh, I'll do nothing. And I think what I've learned from this and what I would hope other people can take away is, even if you can do something on the most tiny scale, whether that's your garden or your neighbour's garden or that patch of land at the end of the road or whatever that is, or the verges, you can do something that makes a difference. And once that snowball starts rolling, it's surprising how quickly it gains momentum, because you meet other like-minded people and they'll start being supportive. And that's been a really positive exercise. I think the other thing I've learned is everyone gets excited about kids doing anything. So not only is Kids Gardening Club good for the world, it's just a great way of getting engagement and support. People love that. The idea of kids doing great stuff is a massive galvanizing thing. We've had no one complain or oppose that. And biodiversity is quite a sort of easy topic. Generally speaking, everyone's in support of it. They just don't know what to do about it. And if you can be practical and helpful and say, here's some practical things you can do and you can make a real difference, which you'll notice within weeks, people are pretty open to that.
Absolutely. Well, wow. I mean, so we were talking earlier about the seminal book is Jennifer Owen's book and the research done in the town of Leicester.
Yes,
I think. So are there going to be building up to a book with all the research and all the?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, lots of people say, "Oh, what do you want to do with this or do that?" And for the time being, it's just exciting to see that
just doing it.
You can make things happen, and I hope it inspires change more broadly outside of the area, and that it reflects. We live in a relatively privileged area. And there's lots of reasons why it's more complicated to do it in more urban areas or more disadvantaged areas. But things can be done, and I hope it inspires some change. And I think one takeout I've also had is, which we chatted about slightly earlier and a bit on sort of Jennifer Owen, is I think we've all, or certainly I grew up, and lots of people and lots of kids grew up thinking, to find exciting nature, you have to go to the zoo, or you have to go on safari, or have to go to far places, because these are things that are far away from us. And what I've really enjoyed through kind of thinking about gardens from a biodiversity perspective is that actually we all can create our own little nature reserve outside our back door. And that is really exciting. And I can only speak for my kids, but they would happily spend an hour in the garden trying to spot different types of bee or different creatures, and they'll run over to me excitedly and they'll try and say, oh, you should upload this to iNaturalist, or can you send a photo of this to Noel, who's our ecologist partner, who's often really helpful. And they just think it's brilliant and they love it. And every kid, more or less, that we've interacted with, after a few hours, and often people start saying, oh, I don't want to touch that, I don't like this, or this looks scary. Within a number of hours, they'll think it's fascinating. And that's amazing. The idea that you can walk around your garden or your local area and find wildlife that, to your children at least, is as exciting as going to Africa and seeing a zebra is really unbelievable. And I think often people get very detached from the nature that's around us. And in the UK, we are not blessed with many huge kind of mammals, but we do have lots of insects, and those insects can be really interesting and exciting and beautiful in different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's such a nice and positive story, Dominic. Thank you. And will you come back quite regularly and give us updates of what's been going on so we can keep in touch with it?
Yeah, no, I'd love to. I think hopefully we'll get our survey results back soon, which should show us some interesting things. And yeah, we've got new projects evolving and happening all the time. And so yeah, I'd love to come back and share how things are going and also see if we can encourage similar activities and projects to happen across London, across the UK, and across the world.
Fabulous. And we'll put all the links and all the contact details in the podcast notes. So you can just go on the website and they'll all be there.
Brilliant.
So thank you, Dominic. Lovely to chat.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to Grow Cookie to Range, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven, and this last episode joined by Dominic Rose, with biodiversity very much at the fore. And Dominic's going to join us repeatedly through next year so we can see how he's getting on with his children's group and his re-biodiversifying his area of London. Next week, I'm back with Arthur Parkinson and we're going to highlight our favourite things in our Christmas range. So see you then.
You can find more information, photos and advice sheets on all the plants and recipes we talk about on this podcast by heading to the show notes or at sarahraven.com/podcast.